Well, welcome to Selah, episode 5. And in this episode, we're talking about yet another type of psalm that we see in the Psalter. So we've talked so far about lament psalms, and we've talked about hymns of praise / thanksgiving. That's one type of psalm. So two, laments, and then hymns of praise and thanksgiving. Now, it's important to note that Bible students, Bible scholars see all different types of psalms. You know, there is no codex from heaven that categorizes these things for us. All that we're doing here is reading the psalms ourselves and trying to note patterns within the Psalter. And so this is just based on human observation. As we read the psalms, we see and perceive that there are different types of psalms. And then to the best of our ability, we categorize those. That's why you find so many, if you read books on the psalms, you'll find so many different types of categorizations. So I'm giving a simple categorization of 4 types of psalms: laments, hymns of praise and thanksgiving, and then in this lesson we come to the third type, which would be royal psalms. In our next episode, we'll talk about a 4th type, a final type, that we will call wisdom psalms. Now, when it comes to the royal psalms, it's important to note that these psalms are few in number, relatively speaking. However, they have a major impact on the shape of the Psalter. We've learned that the laments are the most frequent, most popular type of psalm, and then the hymns of praise and thanksgiving come in second place. They are the second most popular type of psalm within the Psalter. Royal psalms, though not as frequent as those other types of psalms, have a major influence and impact on the Psalter altogether. They seem to be strategically placed at critical places within the Psalter in order to create and keep kind of a royal theme throughout the Psalter. Some psalm scholars have noted that there appear to be what we could call seams in the Psalter, and at these seams there are critical messages. And the royal psalms many times are interjected within these seams in the Psalter. Now, all of this tells us that royal themes, royal elements are at the heart of the Psalter. Royal themes, royal elements are a part of the message of the Psalms. Now, we know this is true because of the Psalter's introduction. If you remember lesson number 2, we talked about the Psalter's introduction, and we discussed the way Psalm 1 and Psalm 2 together provide an introduction to the Psalter. Now, with that, we learned that those 2 psalms both have a distinct and unique focus or topic. Psalm 1 deals with wisdom. It deals with righteousness and obedience to God's law. Psalm 2 deals with the king and devotion to God's king. So, as one has said, there are 2 predominant themes in the Psalter, represented by the introduction. You have first, in Psalm 1, our need for righteousness. Then second, you have in Psalm 2, our need for reverence. Righteousness and reverence are these 2 key themes from the Psalter's introduction. Stated another way, you could say that the introduction of the Psalter proposes first a wisdom slant for the Psalter, and that wisdom slant is rooted in Psalm 1. Then second, you could say that the introduction proposes a royal slant, and that royal slant is rooted in Psalm 2. Psalm 2 can be regarded, though it's a part of the Psalter's introduction, as the first royal psalm in the Psalter. Now, with all this being said, it's perhaps important to start by considering a royal psalm. After Psalm 2, One of the first royal psalms we have is that of Psalm 18. And in Psalm 18, you see a clear kingly royal theme. In verses 49 through 50, we read, "For this I will praise you, O Lord, among the nations, and sing to your name. Great salvation he brings to his king, and shows steadfast love to his anointed, to David and his offspring forever." So let's talk about royal psalms. Royal psalms contain what we just read, a reference to God's king, many times a reference to God's covenant promises to David, a reference to the Lord's anointed. Let's consider the royal psalms by talking about 4 topics. Number 1, let's talk about the nature of royal psalms. The nature of royal psalms. What makes these psalms unique? And it's important for us to clarify this because, as we're going to discuss in a minute, sometimes royal psalms have elements that belong to other psalms. You see elements of lament, elements of praise, elements of thanksgiving. You see elements from the laments like pleas for help, imprecations, etc. You see elements from the hymns of praise, like a call to praise and a focus on the Lord's qualities and deeds. So some get confused. In fact, some psalm scholar would say that royal psalms shouldn't be considered its own unique category. Why do we set these psalms apart as being unique and different in a class of their own? Well, it's because these psalms make a heavy, clear, explicit reference to God's king. One has said that the royal psalms are psalms that are all about Israel's king. Furthermore, we see this as a distinct class because, as we'll discuss later, you can't help but see the way these psalms, these royal psalms, are placed at strategic places within the shape of the Psalter. Now, we could go back to Psalm 2 and consider the way Psalm 2 had a kingly focus. When you read in Psalm 2, verse 4, you read, "He who sits in the heavens laughs. The Lord holds them in derision." Verse 5, "Then he will speak to them in his wrath and terrify them in his fury, saying, As for me, I have set my king on Zion, my holy hill." So this is what you have in the royal psalms, a clear, explicit, concentrated, strategic focus on God's king. Now, examples of royal psalms can be found in Psalm 18, Psalm 20, Psalm 21, Psalm 45, Psalm 72, Psalm 89, Psalm 93 through 99. And again, these psalms that I've just listed seem to be placed at strategic locations throughout the Psalter. It's interesting to note the way the Psalter is divided up into 5 books. 5 books. Perhaps you're like me, you have a translation that makes note. It gives a headline at the beginning of each new book in the Psalter. We have book 1 in Psalm 1 to Psalm 41. And it's interesting to note that there is a royal psalm at the beginning of book 1, but also there's a royal psalm near the beginning of book 2 with Psalm 45. If you were to read on into Psalter, you would find another royal psalm at the end of book 2, Psalm 72, and at the end of book 3, Psalm 89. Furthermore, there is a cluster of royal psalms at the beginning of book 4. So altogether, this instructs us that perhaps the royal psalms, though small in number, pack a big punch. They have a major part to play in the shape of the Psalter. We discussed earlier that it seems like the Psalter is the story of God's king. Psalms 1 through 150 tell a story about God's king. The end result of the royal psalms is that the Psalter seems to sing of the rise of Israel's monarchy in Psalm 1 through 49, the fall of that monarchy in Psalms 50 through 89, and the hopes of a renewal of that monarchy through Christ in Psalms 90 through 150. This is the nature of the royal psalms. They have an overt, explicit, kingly focus, and they are strategically placed throughout the Psalter to give a kingly storyline to the Psalms. Now that we've talked about the nature of the royal psalms, let's talk about the structure of the royal psalms. Now again, when we deal with such things like the structure of the royal psalms or the laments or the hymns of praise, we're dealing with human observation. There are not hard and fast rules when it comes to the structure of the laments we learned or the structures of the hymns of praise. However, through human observation, we can observe that laments typically begin with a complaint. They contain a cry for help. They often employ imprecations against one's enemies. They have hymnic blessings. They have what's called a turning point at some point. Not always, but these are common qualities of laments. If you remember with the hymns of praise, we noted that there are three typical pieces to the structure of a hymn of praise. There is, number one, a call to praise, and then there is a recitation of the Lord's qualities and deeds. God is praised for who he is and what he's done. And then number three, the hymns of praise normally have a conclusion. Again, normally. This is a customary structure we find in the hymns of praise, but there are no hard and fast rules. Now, when it comes to the royal psalms, we have to note that there are definitely no hard and fast rules. The royal psalms are all different. They take upon themselves, each one, a structure of their own many times. In fact, you could even say with the royal psalms that royal psalms often employ the structure of other types of psalms. Commenting on the royal psalms, one have said, these psalms exhibit neither a fixed literary pattern nor a consistent life setting or audience. Despite such things, royal psalms are recognizable because of their focus on Israel's monarchy. They contain, as one has said, a consistent thematic focus on the king. So that's why we set these psalms apart in a different class and category of their own. They have a unique focus on God's king, and they seem to be dispersed throughout the Psalter strategically to draw worshipers who read and pray the Psalms and sing the Psalms to focus on God's covenant promises through his king. So we talked about the nature of the Psalms, the royal Psalms, the structure of the royal Psalms. Let's talk, number three, about the types of royal Psalms. Now, we've done this with our other Psalms so far. We want to do this with royal Psalms as well. We want to note that there are primarily three different types of royal Psalms. So read all the royal Psalms, and you perhaps can put each one into one of these categories. There is, first of all, what we would call a royal lament song. A royal lament. Now, we discussed laments previously in our third episode, and I've just remarked on the way that royal psalms seem to take the form of other psalms at times. But again, we believe they're a different type of psalm because of their kingly focus. Now, there are a couple of royal laments we could consider. It would seem that Psalm 18 is a royal lament. It contained lamenting in verses 43 through 45, where we read, "You delivered me from strife with the people. You made me the head of the nations. People whom I had not known served me. As soon as they heard of me, they obeyed me. Foreigners came cringing to me. Foreigners lost heart and came trembling out of their fortresses." We see lament elements in Psalm 18. We also see such elements in Psalm 89, 49 through 51. Lord, the psalmist said, where is your steadfast love of old, which by your faithfulness you swore to David? Remember, O Lord, how your servants are mocked, and how I bear in my heart the insults of all the many nations, with which your enemies mock, O Lord, with which they mock the footsteps of your anointed. So we see a clear focus on the king, the anointed, but we also see clear lamenting and complaining. So take note, the royal psalms can take a lament form. Now, what does this mean for us? Well, it means that throughout the Old Testament, God's kings often faced hardship and suffering, and they cried out to the Lord for help. And all these things, in a sense, were a reminder that such kings were not the ultimate king that the Lord had promised through David. And such things also reminded us that the king who would come at his first appearing would be a suffering servant who would lament in a way at times, who would pour out his heart in the Garden of Gethsemane as he anticipated the suffering of the cross. In giving us royal laments, the Lord has reminded us that we have a great high priest who can sympathize with our weaknesses, for he was in all points tempted like we are, yet without sin. Royal laments. You also have in the Psalter royal praise and thanksgiving songs. So see what the royal songs do. In the first two categories, you see basically a duplication of the two psalms we've talked about so far, laments and hymns of praise. But again, we know that these are, or we believe that these are royal psalms because of their kingly focus. Listen to Psalm 20, verses 6 through 9. Now I know that the Lord saves his anointed. Anointed, key word, telling us this is a royal psalm. He will answer from his holy heaven with the saving might of his right hand. Some trust in chariots and some in horses, but we trust in the name of the Lord our God. They collapse and fall, but we rise and stand upright. Now, it's important to consider the original background of royal laments and hymns of praise. Royal laments were likely sung after the nation and the king experienced some type of defeat or devastation at the hands of their enemies. Royal hymns of praise were likely sung before kings went into battle or after they experienced victory. Now, what do the royal psalms of praise teach us? Well, they remind us that in Jesus we have a great victor. The King is worthy of all praise. Jesus is worthy of our thanksgiving because he is the one who has defeated Satan, sin, and death. He is a greater king than any king of the nation, for Jesus Christ, the Son of God, is King of kings and Lord of lords. And he is coming again one day, and Revelation 1:7 says, every eye will see him. And Philippians 2:9 through 11 teach us that then every knee will bow and every tongue will confess that Jesus Christ is Lord. And Revelation 19:11 through 15 teaches us that he will subdue the nations when he comes again. Jesus is the one, the royal psalms of praise teach us, who is worthy of all of our praise, worship, and adoration. Well, there's a third type of royal psalm, and that is what we would call a royal enthronement song. A royal enthronement song. These are found in Psalm 47 and Psalms 93 through 99. Actually, Psalms 93 through 99 are actually called the enthronement psalms. And so the only enthronement psalm we have outside of Psalms 93 through 99 is Psalm 47. Listen to Psalm 47, 1 through 4. Clap your hands, all peoples. Shout to God with loud songs of joy. For the Lord Most High is to be feared, a great king over all the earth. He subdued people under our feet and nations under our feet. He chose our heritage for us, the pride of Jacob, whom he loves. Now, if you notice something really important here, I want you to notice something really important here. The focus in this song is not on the anointed or any earthly king. Enthronement psalms are unique in that they crown not an earthly king as king, but they crown the heavenly king as king. In enthronement psalms, you often have Yahweh Melech language. That is, in Hebrew, the Lord reigns type of language. In enthronement psalms, God is depicted as being the king. One has said the enthronement psalms emphasize the God who is completely other, who alone is king, who transcends all creation and therefore is to be worshiped and praised by all. Another has said these psalms shift the focus of the reader away from human kingship to the eternal and just rule of Yahweh as king. Now, why are these psalms so important? Well, throughout the Psalter and throughout the Old Testament, you read of earthly kings. And through reading of earthly kings, you learn that even the best of earthly kings fell at some point. But thanks be to God, though earthly kings falter and fail, the Lord is still king of all. And so we must be careful of ever inordinately placing our eyes on any earthly ruler or king. Our eyes are ultimately to be on God, who is king. Well, we've talked about the nature of the Psalms, the structure of the royal Psalms, the types of the royal Psalms, and let's close with talking about the message of the royal Psalms. And plain and simple, the message of the royal Psalms is that we have a King of Kings and Lord of Lords in the Lord Jesus Christ. The Psalter tells the story of earthly kings falling and failing in order to point the eyes of worshipers to the King of Kings. In 2 Samuel 7, 1 through 17, the Lord promised David that he would send an eternal king through his lineage. And this is the message of the royal Psalms. One has said the royal Psalms bear witness to messianic expectations. The community of God's people believed that God would keep the promises that these Psalms contain, promises about a coming king, a coming Messiah. We know that the early church saw the Psalter this way because in Acts 2:30 we read of the apostles referring to David in the Psalter as being a prophet. What did David prophesy of in the Psalter? The coming king, the Messiah. We also believe this is true because of the prevalent use of the Psalter in the New Testament. The New Testament contains 283 direct quotes of the Old Testament. 116 or 41% of those quotes are from the Psalter. Jesus Christ himself alluded to the Psalms over 50 times. So this teaches us that when New Testament writers explicitly cite Psalms, which are written in small letters with reference to David, they write in capital letters with reference to Christ. It's interesting to note that even in Matthew 22, 41 through 46, Jesus' enemies, his opponents, the Pharisees, seem to assume and accept that the Psalm spoke to the Messiah. They just didn't believe that Jesus was the Messiah. And so we see this emphasis in the Psalter on God's king, God's earthly king, yes, but ultimately on the King of Kings, the Lord Jesus Christ. So read the kingly Psalms. Read Psalm 2, read Psalm 18, Psalm 45, Psalm 89, Psalms 90 and 93, and know that as you pray and sing these Psalms, you are ultimately praying and singing about the Lord Jesus Christ.